Let's talk about blending colors. As we know, processing gives us two different ways to describe each color. The first is the RGB system. Every color is described by three numbers, one each for the red, green, and blue intensities of that color. The second method is the HSB system. Again, we give processing three numbers, this time describing the hue, saturation, and brightness of the color. I discussed each of these in their own videos. Once you've described a color using one of these two methods, processing stores it internally in its own private format. In other words, processing doesn't distinguish between RGB and HSB. To processing, a color is a color is a color, and the different descriptions that we use for creating the colors are entirely for our convenience. As we've seen, we call color mode to tell processing which color system should be in effect when we create a new color. When we want to blend colors, we can blend either the RGB values or the HSB values. Let's take a look at the difference. Here's a little program that I wrote to help us explore blending. There's an orange box at the far left. You can see a little black triangle at the bottom of that box. That's telling us that this orange box is selected. If I move these sliders, I can change the red, green, and blue components of that selected orange color. I can also click on the box on the far right, making that the selected color, and I can modify its color too. There are two horizontal bars that blend the two extreme colors at the left and right. The bar on top is the RGB blend, and the bar on the bottom is the Hsb blend. You can see they're very different. Let's look at the top blend first. Remember, this is the RGB blend. In essence, processing is drawing a straight line in the RGB color cube from the first color to the second and showing us all the colors along that line. Here's the RGB color cube. This is the same color cube we saw in the RGB video, only inside it I've drawn our starting orange color, our ending blue color, and all the in-between colors. You can see that the in-between colors form a straight line, starting from the orange and ending at the blue. You can see that the colors on this line turn pretty muddy in the middle. Let's look at this in just the skeleton form. So I'll turn on the skeleton and I'll make it nice and bright. Now we can see that the colors go from orange to blue, but they get awfully muddy in the middle. It looks like they turn gray. So let's take a look at that diagonal gray axis going from black to white. And yeah, the line of blended colors crosses the gray axis. So at the point where these two lines cross, we get gray. In other words, the color that we're blending from orange to blue at some point will be gray. I'll turn the gray axis off again, and we can see, sure enough, there's that spot between the orange and the blue, pretty close to blue, where it turns gray. Let's go back to our comparison. Remember that the RGB row is on top. We start with orange, and it slowly changes, becoming more and more muddy, until about 2/3 of the way across it becomes gray, and then slowly it starts picking up color again, turning into blue. Now consider the Hsb blend in the bottom bar. It's completely different. What's going on? Well, let's take a look at what happens in Hsb. Here's the Hsb Color Cone. This is the very same hue, saturation, brightness cone that we saw in the video on Hsb. Inside, you can see the path taken by the colors as they get blended in the Hsb cone. And you can see it's not a straight line. In fact, the blended colors form a piece of a spiral. And not just that, it's a spiral that's spreading out as it goes up the cone. Let's take a look at the different pieces of this spiral and see if we can make sense of what's going on here. Let's look at it from the side first. Remember that brightness is going up the cone from the pointy tip to the center of the top face. So we're blending an orange color near the top to a dark blue color about 1/3 of the way from the bottom. And you can see that the brightness of the blended colors is changing at a steady rate. Processing is just blending the brightness of the orange smoothly down to the brightness of the blue, and that causes all the colors in between to smoothly work their way down the brightness axis. Now let's take a look at the changes in hue and saturation. I'll look down the barrel of the cone. First, let's consider saturation. That's how far we are from the central axis of the cone. You can see that the bright orange color is starting out very far from the central axis, so it's very saturated, and the dark blue is much closer to the central axis, so it's less saturated. You can also see that all the colors in between are moving their way in towards the center. In other words, the amount of saturation is decreasing as we move from orange to blue. So now we know where the curve is coming from. It's the only component left, the change in hue. Remember that hue goes around the cone. So when we change hues from orange to blue, we don't take a straight line, but instead we curl around the cone. This takes us from the oranges, through the yellows, through the greens, and finally to blue. This wrapping around of the hue is the source of the spiral shape. Let's go back to our side-by-side comparison. Now we can see why RGB and HSB look different. The RGB blend on top is showing us colors along a straight line in the red, green, blue cube. On the other hand, the Hsb blend on the bottom is quite different. The brightness and saturation decrease from the orange to the blue, and the hue wraps its way around the color cone through the yellows and the greens to get to the blue. Remember, none of this has anything at all to do with how you originally define your colors, because processing stores colors in its own internal format. As soon as you've defined a color, processing forgets whether it was RGB or HSB. It's just a color. I'd like to show you something about Hsb blending so it doesn't surprise you. Here in the blending program, I've adjusted the colors at both ends. We're going from a kind of orange on the left to a kind of a red on the right. Using these choices, you can see that the RGB blend is very smooth, while the Hsb blend is wildly different. That's because of how Hsb blends. To see why, I'm going to replace the preview box in the lower right with a little view of the Hsb cone. I'm going to look down the cone from the flat end towards the pointy tip, so the colors seem to be blended clockwise. Now we can see our starting orange color at about 12 o'clock and our ending reddish color at about 11 o'clock. To perform the blend, processing goes all the way around clockwise from 12 o'clock to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, marching its way all the way around until it gets to the reddish color at 11 o'clock. Now for the surprise. I'll take that red color and add some green to it. That nudges it into a kind of a yellow. Now you can see we're blending from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, and that means processing doesn't have to go very far at all. In this case, going from 12 to 1 means passing through just a very few intermediate hues. To my eye, the RGB blend and Hsb blends look almost the same. This wraps up the key differences between blending in RGB and Hsb. Over time, you'll begin to build up a sense for yourself and your own aesthetics to help you choose the style that's best for any given project.